Happy National Drug Endangered Children Awareness Day. I like seeing the red. I see so many of you wearing it. Good to see so many faces that we know. So while we're waiting to get started for another minute, I'm going to ask for people to play a little game with me. Throw in the chat, what is something that you have done for DEC Awareness Day today? It could be just attending this right now, but throw that in the chat. Let's see what everyone's doing across the nation for today. I love it. I am here. That totally counts. I have been seeing lots on social media too. We've been sharing a lot, but I've been seeing so many of the DEC Alliances sharing so many things. So that's been fun to see all of that. So if you haven't had a chance to jump on social media yet today, do that at some point and look through and see all the fun things that everyone's doing across the nation. Had some presentations happening, talking about DEC. Good stuff. It's been a fun day for us. We have some of our team is out at the RX Summit out in Nashville. I am not one of them this time, but they're having a fun time out there and been talking to a lot of people and have an exhibit booth there and a poster session. And so it's been fun to connect with a lot of people that have been out at that event and see all the pictures of everyone that's out there. Right. Lots of social media. I'll have to get back on social media again. And I love what Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania is doing. I'm going to call them out doing their chalk art stuff at the courthouse. Thanks, Kim. Good things. That's good, simple things that we can do to raise awareness on this day and just talk more about drug endangered children. And that's all of our children, whether substance misuse is happening in our home or not. Our children are drug endangered because it's happening within all of our communities. And so it's something that we want to talk about, bring awareness. And this one day we can spotlight it in fun, positive, happy ways. And we can talk about it in all this other serious ways, all the other days of the year as we do trainings and educate people about it and bring awareness in all the different ways that we need to do throughout the rest of the year. Right. I think we have Luke. Are you on? I think I saw your name, but I haven't seen your face yet. Oh, there he comes.
On. Hi.
There you are. Are we waiting for Kevin?
He's 2 screens over from me, at least from my.
Yours. Okay, I just didn't see his name pop up yet. I just wanted to make sure. All
right.
Well,
yep. We got him.
I am here. Hello, everybody.
Now I hear Kevin there too. Perfect. I just wanted to make sure before I started to introduce you two that we had both of you on. So thank you both. So again, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our all hands on deck call that happens to be on DEC Awareness Day. And we're really excited to see in the chat all the fun things that you've been doing to recognize DEC Awareness Day. And thank you so much for being part of it. Being here just for this call is a way that you're recognizing it and showing your support. And so we greatly appreciate that. We are very excited for our call today. We have both Kevin and Luke here with us from Smart Approaches to Marijuana, or SAM. And so I'm not going to take up their time. I'm going to turn it over to them and let them share their information. They are willing to take questions, but we're going to do that at the end. So if you want to throw questions in the chat or just hang on to those until the end, then we'll have some time towards the end that we'll plan on doing that. So Kevin and Luke, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everybody. It's so nice to see you all. Some of you I know, other new faces. And I just want to thank you so much for your dedication and really your hard-driven work in this critical issue of drug endangered children, of really an issue that doesn't get enough, does not get enough attention because we are so focused, as you can imagine, given the overdose crisis, on the individual drug user, which obviously needs help. We need support services. We need treatment. We need to, frankly, often convince people they need treatment. Sometimes it's harder to even do that than actually find treatment. But we're rightly focused on the user, given the overdose crisis. But in that focus, we have completely forgotten as a country about how this affects loved ones and other people around that individual user. We talk about harm reduction. People talk about harm reduction for the individual. They don't talk about harm reduction for the family, harm reduction for the community. And the best harm reduction for the community, family, or frankly, individual is prevention. is prevention. That is the best kind of harm reduction, is harm prevention. Otherwise, it's who can build a better Band-Aid. And Band-Aids are needed. We absolutely need Band-Aids. When you're bleeding, you need a Band-Aid. But how can we get to the point where we're stopping actually bleeding in the first place? And we know we can get to that point, but as a country, we need to have the will to do that. So that's kind of the spirit in which Luke and I are just so honored to join you all. And I want to thank DEC and, National DEC and Carlton Hall and everybody, Carrie, the whole team who's been working so hard on this issue, and we're honored to be invited. So we're going to do a somewhat sort of short presentation, and then we really want to open it up to questions. And I just ask you that you please follow us on X at Learn About Sam. Please, you can subscribe to our newsletter as well as we have a podcast that Luke leads, as well as a weekly newsletter of the top 15 headlines in the drug policy world called The Drug Report. All that's free. We'll put the links in at the end for you to check out. But, we don't want this conversation to end today as well. Oh, yes. And we also have our Friday Fact, which is thank you for the reminder, which basically the Friday Fact is one fact every Friday, just literally one statistic that we put out there that can help you in your work. And it was actually inspired by Dr. Eric Wish at University of Maryland, Caesar. They used to have something called the info fax, FAX, if you know what a fax is. Remember that. No one's old enough to remember what a fax is, but we used to have the fact, and every Friday the fax would come in with a drug fact, and we thought, let's resurrect that for the 2020s here. And so that's what we did with the Friday Fact. So I'm going to share a presentation, and Luke and I, and of course I want Luke to introduce himself as well. Maybe Luke, while I'm getting on the presentation, you can introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone.
As well.
My name is Luke Niforatos. I'm the Executive Vice President at SAM, and it's very nice to meet you all, and thank you. It's really an honor to be on here. You all are doing tremendous work. I am from Colorado, and that's what led me to work on this issue of marijuana policy and then drug policy more broadly. I have two young daughters, 8 and 4, and a wonderful wife. And I look at this as really my whole mission is to help protect our families and our kids, particularly who are the victims of policies like this, that people think that, it's illegal to purchase unless you're 21. So that means no kids are ever going to get into it. And unfortunately, it's just, such a foolish thing to say. And I think if we think about it for 2 seconds, we realized how foolish that is. So anyway, that's why I'm here. So thank you all for having us.
Absolutely. And, we're going to focus our presentation on the impact of marijuana legalization, which, is an issue that people, I think often in society are forgetting about, that the impact that it is having. So we're going to talk about that. But if you want to ask about anything related to addiction, related to fentanyl, related to methamphetamine, please, when we have the forum, nothing's off the table. If you don't know about us, we started when I left the White House in 2011. We wanted a nonpartisan, high-profile, policy-based organization that embraced Republicans, Democrats, everybody, which wasn't a big deal then, but I guess it's a big deal now if you work with both. But we do. We work with both. We work with anybody that will work with us. We are guided by a scientific advisory board, the leading researchers in our country on this issue. And really, we work very closely with the press because it's very important to get the word out there. We work with groups as diverse as the NAACP, to physicians around the country, to our local affiliates, to national medical groups, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd love to work with you. If you think we can come in and do an event or a training for you, we'd be more than happy to do that, to talk with your community, and really from a policy point of view. And then we're going to get into how this is affecting children specifically. So that's coming. But just to kind of start on 30,000 feet, as a country, we've been sold a false dichotomy of legalization versus incarceration, that those are the only two ways to talk about drugs or marijuana specifically. And the reality is there are many different issues. I'd simplistically put them up as 3 different issues, but even there's more than 3 that often get conflated. So a lot of people that support legalization, they're actually supporting what you might call decriminalization, which is, not throwing people in prison for low-level amounts of use, which, by the way, doesn't really happen anywhere anyways, but in theory, which is, of course, different than truly going through the FDA for the medicinal use versus not going through the FDA for the medicinal use, which is a whole other subject we're not touching upon today, but happy to answer questions about, versus use, sales, production, distribution, all of that being legal. These are These are very different issues that often get conflated. Speaking of bipartisan, we have both President Trump's Surgeon General from the previous administration, Jerome Adams, talking about this and saying that it's dangerous, as well as President Obama and President Biden's Surgeon General saying the same thing. So if they agree on anything, it's this. And the fact that marijuana is harmful, it's addictive. Most people don't realize that. We're going to get into some stats around that, but people are not listening to the science. They're not understanding what's happening. And they're not understanding that this move to normalize marijuana is really about big corporations. It's about money and profit. It's not about anything else. Not about social justice. It's not about medicine even. It's not about removing criminal penalties. It is about making a lot of money. And this is the issue we're very worried about. We're worried because big tobacco is now involved in this pursuit. We're worried because they're using the same tactics. And we have a whole presentation about going through the tactics that big tobacco used for 120 years versus the tactics that big marijuana is using. They're almost identical. Things like brand promotion, celebrity, downplaying the risks, promoting fake medicinal use, on and on and on and on. And we seem not to be learning our lesson because the alcohol and tobacco industries are buying into marijuana. So this is what gets us very, very worried. It keeps us up at night, are these issues. And we've had legalization now for over 10 years in some states. And what have we learned? We learned that potency has skyrocketed, addiction has increased, and mental health concerns are exacerbated. We've also learned that young kids are getting affected and becoming innocent victims, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The thing about potency people need to understand is that we're not talking about old marijuana, the old flower, as they call it, the joints. We're talking about the edibles, the ice creams, the cookies, the candy bars, the popsicles, the syrups, the tonics, the vapes, the waxes. It is on and on and on and on. We're talking about these very high potency things that can be completely hidden. People don't, that looks like an asthma inhaler. And that's the point, is that it's about hidden. It's about appealing to kids. It's literally using candy brands that we have today and appealing to kids. So the industry today is very focused on making kid-friendly products, even though they deny it, but they're doing it all the time. They're focused on very highly potent marijuana, up to 99% pure, which is just crazy to think about. They're focused on very aggressive marketing. So they're doing free samples, billboard advertising, and other things that big tobacco used. Big tobacco didn't have Instagram in 1965, and they didn't have YouTube, but big marijuana does. So it's even worse. They are all about contaminants. So if anybody ever tells you, at least you know what you're getting, the answer is you don't know what you're getting. We just put one little example from 10 years ago, but every month there are recalls happening, and we are fighting regulation. The pot industry has lobbied very hard against common sense regulation, such as warning labels, dosing rules, bans on advertising, THC limits. We're trying to do that in a lot of these states, and it's become very, very difficult. They are fighting all the regulation they can. So the result has been that Colorado is consistently one of the top states for youth initiation. For example, is the first state that's done this. We have a thriving underground market. So the drug dealers haven't gone away, as we like to say. They haven't all gone to dental school or something. As people said, we're going to get rid of the drug dealers. No, we actually made more drug dealers. The THC caps have failed when we've tried. We've tried to limit location of stores. The money's not being used for anything, frankly, that it was supposed to be used for. The tax revenue. It's being diverted to general funds. And it's really about ultra potent marijuana that's significantly more potent than it ever was. These waxes and dabs and oils, that is becoming a bigger share of the market. And this was from 6 years ago. We have to ask our friend John Calkins to update this. But if you think about what the new kind of consumer is, we used to compare it to the caffeine you get in a 20-ounce Coke to the caffeine you get in 65 Starbucks cappuccinos. That's the difference between the typical user of THC 20 years ago and the typical user now. It's an order of magnitude different. We are talking about a completely different drug than the baby boomers used in the 60s and 70s. And this is why, it's just not getting through our heads in America about the problem. And there is collateral damage. There are real faces, real children that have died as a result either of their own use, usually by suicide, or an accidental either fall or crash of some kind, car or not. But also this issue of negligence. The issue of negligence. These are just good 10 headlines that we found very quickly with a Google search, but we systematically collect this. You can find these very easily. This is what's happening when parents and caregivers are under the influence of THC, is that there is collateral damage. We have documented over 300 cases of child death linked to a parent or caretaker's marijuana use. And there's probably a lot more, folks. This is only what gets reported in the news. Imagine the number of cases, double, triple, quadruple, quintuple, I think, in terms of those that we don't even know about. There's a group called Parents Opposed to Pot that we work with, and they actually went through the states and counted about child deaths due to marijuana, whether it was violence, because guess what? Today's marijuana makes you violent. It can make you violent. It's not about chilling you out anymore. It's not what it's about. Fires are common. People are making these crazy at-home concentrates, which states like Maryland just legalized, which is unbelievable. Drowning, especially in a state like Florida, obviously has a lot of pools to begin with. Hot cars, violent neglect, guns, suffocation, on and on and on. We have a whole list of things. Hash oil fire, violence. The babysitter drove over the kid who was 17 months old in California in 2013. I mean, it's just very, very, very sad in terms of what we're seeing. These are real kids. These are real things that are happening, and they're happening also because of marijuana-induced psychosis, marijuana-induced extreme panic attacks. They're happening because people are literally going crazy under this substance today. And this is something that's very difficult for people to understand and absorb, but it is absolutely happening because of the child neglect. And these are real kids. These are real people. This is what we're all fighting for. And so that's why it's so, so important to remember why we're doing this, to say their names, Michaela Roberts, Hannah Marshall, to look at their pictures and to show our legislators what they are doing when they are commercializing marijuana. And so, I think it's just very, very important to focus on those stories. It's also important to focus on facts and statistics. We have that too. We have that data, but we need to do both. That's going to be the most, I think, the most impactful. So I'm going to push it over to Luke, who is going to talk about public health impact. I think my screen just stopped.
Yep, I just switched out the slide, so I think we're good to go. So I think, seeing those stories, and what's unfortunate is one of those families from Colorado that was just listed. I actually have a friend who was involved in the justice system with the father who perpetrated that offense while high on marijuana. And so very, very sad, but these are real people who unfortunately I have relations who are connected to these stories. So very important we share the truth, and that's what we at SAM are about. Getting more into the public health impact, we are seeing just astronomical rise in heavy use of marijuana. We hear a lot of talk about, are more people trying it? Yes, more people are trying it. Are more youth trying it? Yes, there are more youth that are trying it. But what we're really most concerned about is the level of the amount of use that's happening per person. So this, I think, statistic really kind of spells it out. 2016, 2 years after Colorado legalized, only 12% of the marijuana consumers in Colorado were using marijuana on a daily basis. But now in 2022, more than half of the marijuana users in the state are using it every single day. So what that means is that most people who use marijuana in Colorado are using it every single day, which this is obviously the most problematic type of use. We're not talking about people who are using it once a month or, casual users. These are very intense. Vast majority of them meet the clinical criteria for addiction, for cannabis use disorder. And so when we have this level of heavy use, that is what is really driving, the profits for the marijuana industry. So they're not sad about it. But B, it's what's driving a lot of the public health harms and these unnecessary victims that we've talked about. So, many more daily users. This is the national data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. Many. I mean, it's been a decade, and we've seen it go from about 8 million to 30 million people in America who used it in the last month. So much more. Daily users in the last month. So much heavier use. Many more people that are using it heavily. And so, why do we care about that level of heavy use? Well, we've seen some stories that I think give us some pause, but we know from the research that heavy use of marijuana makes you 5 times more likely, using the high potency marijuana that everyone's using, makes you 5 times more likely to develop schizophrenia or psychosis. That's compared to 3 times more likely if you're using the low potency kind of old marijuana. So marijuana's got an association with these mental health concerns, but with the new high potency products, it is even more exacerbated. So, 5 times more likely if you're using it every single day, and we have 30 million Americans who are using it every single day. So do the math on what we're doing in terms of multiplying our mental health crisis problems. So, daily use, as we've talked about, leads to mental health issues. It also gives you a 3 to 5-fold increased chance in head and neck cancers, all kinds of other issues. There's a lot of toxic metals and other contaminants that are in the smoke from marijuana. So a lot of people think that somehow marijuana smoke is maybe better than tobacco smoke, but actually the American Lung Association has found that actually it's either the same or possibly worse. And so we're seeing a lot of issues related to the heavy use of this drug. And again, cannabis use disorder diagnoses, unsurprisingly, are steadily rising as Americans continue to experiment with this drug and use it more. But we're also seeing that there's been an increase among those in the 12 to 17 range for addiction. So this study by Sabet et al. Looked at all of the states that have legalized recreational marijuana. And what they found was that kids 12 to 17, in every single state to legalize, they've seen a 25% increase in cannabis use disorder for that youth age group. So addiction is rising among our youth in states that have legalized it. And so that is something that, we need to be very cognizant about. Not only our youth, though, we obviously know that our youth are being impacted, but then we look at the broader public, including adults. And this is actually this is research that is widely cited. It's also in the National Institute on Drug Abuse, which is part of the National Institutes of Health. So this is on their website page for Is Marijuana Addictive? So you can look this up. But 1 in 3 people, adults, kids, everyone, 1 in 3 people who use marijuana in the last year will develop a cannabis use disorder. That's a 30% addiction rate. We have seen this rate rise astronomically over the last decade because this number a decade ago was 1 in 10. So clearly something's changed. What has changed? Well, it's the potency. The potency has changed and the addiction rates have increased correspondingly. And so this is the Monitoring the Future data, which is great research that's done out of the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, where they look at drug use and attitudes among high schoolers in America. And what they found is, high school seniors, almost 30% reported using marijuana in the last year, 18% of sophomores, 8% of 8th graders. So we are seeing more interest among those younger demographics, and particularly those in school, which marries up to some of the anecdotes we're hearing about, particularly with vaping going on in schools. A lot of them are vaping marijuana. The other piece of this is that, we're obviously, the addiction, the cannabis use disorder, but you have people that, compared with non-users, they're using marijuana on a regular basis. That makes them much more likely to have these psychosocial events, psychosis, depression, also suicidal ideation. And that's something that, unfortunately here in Colorado, where I'm from, we have THC, which is the active ingredient that gets you high. That is the top test result in youth suicide toxicology tests is marijuana. So it's very much tied now into the epidemic of suicide that we're seeing in a lot of states in this country. And so now they're passing laws in different states and also here in Colorado to make sure we're pulling tests from these suicides that look at what drugs are in the system, because the marijuana piece of this is becoming a much bigger topic of conversation. So this is looking at ages 12 to 17 and 18 to 25. So I talked about how 12 to 17 we're seeing increases, and you can see that purple is legal, red is non-legal. Clearly, the legal states have much higher rates across both age cohorts. But what's really, I think, important to note is that your brain is still developing well into your 20s, likely to 28, even 30, some might say. So this age range of 18 to 25, I mean, they are the ones that are really driving the increase in use right now. I mean, they're the ones that are really going headlong into marijuana. And these are people who are who are graduating from college, that are entering the workforce their first couple of years. Their brains are still developing. So this is a very critical time that marijuana is being introduced into that age group. And that's something that I think, we're going to unfortunately see the outcomes of that in the years to come. But I think that's an age group we've got to watch and we need to protect. So I mentioned that, marijuana users now, like there's very few, once a month marijuana users in Colorado, and that really reflects elsewhere as well. The people who are using marijuana use it very heavily in this country. So nothing tells that story better than this graph right here. And this is from the preeminent researcher, Jonathan Calkins from Carnegie Mellon, and the research study he just did late last year. So basically what you're looking at right here is, the green bar is the marijuana use, and the red bar is alcohol. And this is looking at daily or near daily use. So, heavily addicted, most likely all of them. So you see now that there are more people in this country using marijuana every single day than there are using alcohol every single day. And the first question I always get from this is like, oh, is marijuana replacing alcohol? Maybe that's a good thing. But that's not what's being explored here. What it's found, what the finding is that of the people who use marijuana, they're all using it a lot more heavily than the people who use alcohol and not marijuana. So hopefully that makes sense. But if you're a marijuana user in this country, you are much more likely to be using it heavily than you are if you're just an alcohol user in this country. And so I think that that is striking. It gets at this issue I was talking about of the increase in the heavy use. It's not just how many people are using it, it's how heavily a growing niche of society is using it. And the harms that they're experiencing are much more magnified than somebody who's going to use it once a month or once a year. And so we care about that because if you're regularly using marijuana, you're 25% more likely to need hospitalization. And this study looked at, it's a very good one, you can check it out, but this study looked at 60 different controlling variables, prior history, et cetera, use of other substances, a lot of other things that would send somebody to the hospital, and they controlled for all those variables. And these folks who regularly used it, they were still much more likely to need hospitalization, medical care. Not surprising, especially for those of you who work in healthcare or have experience in healthcare. That the top 10 morbidities and the top 10 most costly illnesses, diagnoses in this country, in our healthcare system, almost all of the top 10 are related to either tobacco or alcohol or to legal drugs. So it's not surprising that increased drug use makes you more likely to need more care. And so obviously that reflects down to stroke. It reflects to risk of heart attack because when you're smoking marijuana particularly, it does damage to your vessels, to your blood pressure. So again, I think people think about this as if it's an individual choice and it's something they're doing for to themselves. But actually, there are downstream issues you don't realize. The threat to your life down the road of your increased risk of heart attack, then that impacts the entire family and the community. So not surprisingly, and honestly, well, actually, this might be surprising to many people, which is that there were more marijuana-related ED visits last year in America than there were opioid visits. Actually, that's probably very surprising to many of you. And so what these are looking at is these are people who have developed maybe cannabis hyperemesis syndrome, which if you're heavily using marijuana, you start this uncontrollable vomiting syndrome that many people have died from. That's what a lot of people are going to the hospital for now. You also have issues of psychosis or driving or whatever it might be. It's impacting so many different things now that we're seeing more people hitting the ER because of it. And frankly, this doesn't look like what you would expect. Everyone's like, oh, opioids, way worse, fentanyl, way worse. But it's not about how bad a drug might be on its own merit. It's actually more important to look at how prevalent it is, because if you have millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of people trying a drug and using it heavily, its harms are more broadly felt versus if you keep it illegal, for example, and so it's much less prevalent, much less used, much less heavily used, you don't experience as much of the harms related to that. So obviously in Colorado, we were promised to get rid of the black market. It's been such a laugh. Many of you have probably seen in the news, but the black market is still just a gigantic issue in states that have legalized it. And California, when they legalized a long time ago, and they still 85 to 90% of the products are black market products. And so the dealers are still alive and well and victimizing a lot of people. And not only that, but there's a lot of other issues with contamination. We just had Earth Day a few days ago, and we posted, actually, you should all check out our Twitter, because we posted a bunch of just jaw-dropping facts about what marijuana does to the environment. I mean, you're reading it and you're like, I had no idea. The water consumption, the electricity consumption, the pesticides that are being used by these marijuana companies. I mean, it's just so funny that, there's kind of this image out there that marijuana is homegrown and natural and organic, and it's hippies out there doing it. But it's like marijuana looks a lot more like Monsanto today than it does like anything that is organic, unfortunately. So these are some of the stats, as it relates to that, just for your interest, and also they're online as well. But driving, I think, is one of the ultimate ways that we have a lot of people become endangered by marijuana use, and have a lot of drug endangered children, quite frankly, is through this driving issue. So in Colorado, 1 in 4 of all of our road deaths involved marijuana driver. We saw a doubling in people dying from marijuana impaired drivers after we legalized. So it's much more prevalent on our roads. More people are dying, losing their parents on the roads because of this, losing family members on the roads because of this. And so that's a big issue. But also in Colorado, we've done some research, and there's some surveys done with our kids. And what they found is school-aged kids, it was something like 60% of them said that they had driven in the car when somebody was high with marijuana who was driving it. And so it is impacting our youth in our state and in other states as well. Yeah, so this is another number that we got from Colorado as well. So 49% of teen drivers, they reported they were driving under the influence. So definitely a serious problem that we're seeing on the roads. And then, of course, we're seeing the advertising. And this is another way that youth are being lost, I think, in the cracks, is that we have a lot of advertising, very irresponsible claims. I mean, look at this, 41% of 8th and 10th graders said they saw billboards, at least once daily related to marijuana. So clearly that's having an impact on our kids and the way that they perceive marijuana, whether it's risky or not risky. And so, people who reported seeing marijuana ads, obviously more likely to use, more likely to have a lower perception of harm from using it. And so we have to think about what these policies do to then enable these trends that hurt our kids, quite frankly. So obviously prenatal use is another big issue. So Kevin was talking earlier about the Dr. Jerome Adams, the former Surgeon General, and the big thrust for his announcement was warning pregnant mothers, saying we have more pregnant mothers in this country using marijuana than ever before during pregnancy, and that is a threat to the child in the womb. And you can see that here. There's a lot of increase in risk for very serious complications during your pregnancy if you're using marijuana. And yet, the marijuana industry has groups of advocates that they fund, that they promote, called Canna Moms, for example. That's one of them. And they're out there normalizing this idea that marijuana is a great thing to use during your pregnancy, during motherhood, after pregnancy, after delivery with your little children. I mean, it is absolutely unconscionable, the twilight zone we live in terms of what we're allowing to be pushed out there. But there are whole groups, look it up, there are whole groups that are wholly designed to normalize use for mothers and for pregnant mothers. And they will not condemn the use of marijuana during pregnancy, even though they're asked to do it. It's truly frightening. So this kind of evidence is important to have in your back pocket when you run into those issues. And then obviously this is kind of one of the traditional ways in which we have drug endangered children issues when it relates to marijuana. But we've allowed in these states the proliferation of gummy bears, candies, very child-friendly products. And now they're getting into the hands of our kids. So, kids 0 to 12, huge increase in exposures for them, poisonings for them. What that means is gummies left out on the table by a parent who's high. And so obviously they're not making great decisions to begin with. and you have a child that's taking those products and consuming them, and then they've got to rush them, call the poison control center, go to the hospital, et cetera. So, that's something that definitely should be on your radars if it's not already. So I'm going to give you a little bit of just a little political flair, and then we can wrap this presentation. We're happy to take any questions, but just, I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, isn't it a done deal? And isn't this kind of, everyone's on board with it in terms of legalization? And we're seeing such a backlash right now. The wave and the tide have truly turned. Since 2022, many of you may not know, 7 out of 10 states have rejected legalization at the ballot, states that you would not expect to do so. And so we're seeing some really sizable wins. Also, we're seeing polls like this one in Gallup in last summer, where they asked the public, this number has been off the charts. Oh, marijuana is positive. It's great. But you see the drop now. Most Americans think marijuana has had a negative effect on society. It's really the first time in quite some time that people have thought that. So we're seeing a change nationally. We're seeing, I think I just show that slide. We're seeing a change nationally, but then there's another slide we have that I don't have in this deck. But the other thing we're seeing is voter remorse. So in Maryland, for example, 2 out of 3 voters voted to legalize marijuana there several years ago. And now, after a few years of legalization in Maryland, they did that poll again, and they found that 2 out of 3 voters regrets the decision to legalize marijuana in Maryland. They think it's had a negative effect on their state. Fascinating. But I think what we're seeing is the harms to children, the unintended consequences. I also think what we're seeing also is an industry that has just totally taken over the places that they've been allowed to be, and they're lobbying, and their ads everywhere, and their products everywhere. And I think people are seeing a lot of the unintended consequences come to fruition. So please, this is a QR code you can scan with your phone. These are all of our resources. We have a great toolkit, covers all the topics you could think of, everything from children to driving to the market, the black market, to myths, facts, etc. So scan that, you can get all the resources you need, or you can just go to our website, learnaboutsam.org. And Kevin mentioned all these things, but we have all our various websites and other things that you can check out. So with that being said, that wraps our presentation, and we're happy to take any questions that you all may have. And Carrie, I don't know how you want to handle that.
Thank you so much, Luke and Kevin. Appreciate all that. The first question that came in was, do they have access to the slides? And I said, yes, they do. Brendan and I are emailing on the back end, and if we get them before the call's over, I will share them in the chat. But if I don't get them before the call's over, then I'll have you put your email addresses for those that want the slides in the chat, and then I'll make sure to get those out to you by the end of the week. We're doing a little bit on the back end to get that going. What I loved about some of that, first, you both talk really fast, and I do too, and so I appreciate other people that do that. So it's a lot of information that you gave, so I know that the slides will be helpful for people to refer back to and to see all that information. I love that we have an opioid crisis, and not I love it, but that we recognize it. We have an opioid crisis in the United States, but I didn't know that there was more marijuana hospitalizations than there was for opioids. Like that was powerful. And we need to think about that and realize how much that's impacting the children that are living in these homes, are living in these communities where marijuana is being used on a daily basis with all that. So I appreciate that information so much. All right, I did have a question from Allison. Allison is one of our board members. Allison, did you want to ask it, or do you want me to ask it for you? Looks like she's looking. There you go.
Hi. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was excellent. I wanted to cue into a couple things. One is the dynamic between addiction and substance use disorder, and to clarify that. And that was also asked by Dr. Natalie Harding. And then the other question I had is, do you know how they assess the marijuana use in moms in the research that you shared just right before the end? Was it a blood test? Was it voluntary admission? Do you know how it is that they assess the marijuana use?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Appreciate it. So a few things. One is, the studies, for example, by Deb Hassan, which found that 1 in 3 past year users had what they called an addiction. That was before that actually they defined that as a dependence and or addiction.
Right.
And so obviously, substance use disorder is the preferred way of talking about it now. But of course, one thing we've also learned is that when we're talking to people that are not in our field, which are people that we want to talk to because we want to we want to convince new people. We don't want to just talk to the same people, as great as they are. We have to sometimes meet people where they're at in terms of their language, right? And so, especially young people. I mean, if you talk to a 16-year-old about substance use disorder, that sounds very foreign. And so, I understand the need to obviously destigmatize people with addictions, with substance use disorders, with dependencies, etc. But I also understand the practical side of it. So I sort of see, I see things both ways, I guess.
Well, I think using both that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, great.
Yeah. And then for pregnant women, so obviously, self-reporting happens sometimes, and that does happen. But oftentimes we're talking about urine testing, which actually, there's this myth about urine testing that it only can detect use from 30 days ago, and we don't know if they've recently used. There are now ways to where the tests are much more sensitive, where you can pretty confidently say this is recent use. I mean, if there are large amounts of marijuana in the urine, that is not going to be somebody who used a little bit 30 days ago. And yet that's a big myth that's out there. They also, from the second trimester onwards, there's tests of cord blood meconium tests that can detect THC exposure as well. Those are kind of the main ways.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Are there other questions? You're welcome to unmute, or you can put it in the chat and ask those questions. And Kevin and Luke's team member, Brendan, was able to get the slides, so I just put those in the chat so you can grab those there.
Okay. That's great.
Any other questions that you're thinking of? I think one of my questions, as I've heard from you before, and as I'm learning more about marijuana use myself, how are we able to educate people better that this is not the same pot that it was in the 70s, and that you can't even really get that anymore? How do we educate people better about that it is something that's so different?
I think a lot of people understand that we've become just better at agriculture since the 70s, and that's kind of where this is. We've learned to genetically breed plants. That's why your tomatoes, for better or worse, last a lot longer than they used to, for example. And so I think when we sort of talk about it in that language, people can kind of understand that. I think that most have understood and heard that this is a big issue, and that the potency has greatly increased.
And that is a good thing, but we need to,
I see a question here in the chat about the impact on pets in the home as well. And that is definitely an issue. And there's been a few recent research studies about the impact on pets. But yeah, more dogs are getting into the products. And that's definitely an issue that we're seeing now that's kind of been popping a little bit recently.
All right, yes. I got another one that was sent to me that said, for the daily users, what marijuana product are they using? Is it vapes, edibles?
Good question. So it still is a narrowly majority of smoked, joints, but that is rapidly being market share, if you will, is rapidly shrinking to the vaping as well as the edibles and the concentrates. It's just, the entire tobacco industry is pushing now for vaping because it's actually an even better economic model for them to sell people these devices and then sell repeat customers these cartridges with whatever they want in it. So that is definitely the future of smoking. And right now they're getting away with a little bit of the harm reduction angle of, oh, well, maybe it's better for you than smoking. But they're thinking of it as a great way to just keep people hooked. So that's what's happening. And as it relates to marijuana, that particularly is an issue. So vaping is definitely growing a lot. And when you look at the state level numbers, in addition to these concentrates, like, dabbing. For those of you who've heard of dabbing, it's, vaporizing a very small amount of 100%, 99% THC, extremely highly potent way to use it. We've seen a lot of the psychosis issues come from that. For those of you who know Laura Stack, that's what she's working to do, is educate people about that. But dabbing and vaping, those are big. That's pretty much the future of how this stuff is being consumed.
Thank you. I haven't seen any other questions come in the chat. Anyone else
There-
have anything else?
I saw a question about pets, and I do think it's important to talk about that. It's a big issue, actually. Marijuana is toxic to cats and dogs and other pets, other horses and others. And we've seen a huge increase. Obviously, this is an accidental ingestion where someone leaves, edibles, or usually it's edibles, out, and then they get ingested, and that is extremely dangerous. And we have seen a really huge uptick in that.
Yeah, I see this other question. Why has it been said for years not addictive, but now addictive? Great question. So it's always been addictive. We've always seen addiction to marijuana, and that's something that we've seen. However, it was a lot less addictive more than a decade ago, because people were really just finding the plant. It was much more. It wasn't completely natural, but it was much closer to being natural. And the percent of the potency was 1 to 3%. So there just wasn't as much of the drug present in the average joint that people were smoking. So it was more difficult to get addicted to it. But now it is so much more potent that it is just much easier to get addicted to its endorphin releasing properties, dopamine impacting properties. That's just, it's just impacting those areas of your brain, those reward centers, much more than your average joint several decades would. So that's why we're seeing, first of all, the uptick in addiction, but really, the public has just been misled for a really long time. They've been saying marijuana is not addictive for decades. So we're at that critical mass in terms of misinformation, and now the science really has to kind of catch up and get out there for people to understand. Yeah, it absolutely is addictive.
June, I see you raising your hand.
Hi, Carrie. Hi, June. I work with survivors and speak to survivors of human trafficking all the time. That's what we do. And a common theme across the past few months, probably 6 months or so, has been they do come from homes where drugs are the priority, and they have mentioned marijuana and vaping, and when they can't get that on their own, they seek it out. And for quite a few, there's been a link there. They can't get it on their own, so they turn to these dodgy people sources, and they end up trading one thing for these drugs because they weren't able to get it from their parents anymore, or for whatever reason. And I'm wondering if you have seen anything to back that up, or any experience where the kids aren't able to get this. Mom and dad might be able to get it legally, but because they're accessing that, then they're addicted and they reach out. And unfortunately, they're susceptible now to a whole greater evil. Any input on that?
Yeah, thank you for the incredible work that you do. And human trafficking is such an awful thing, an ugly thing in our world that exists, and we need people like you to fight that good fight. So thank you, June. But yeah, drugs have been very much tied into human trafficking, as I think and everyone knows. It's a way that is used to keep people imprisoned and keep the folks that they're trafficking, prisoned chemically, to need the drugs that they're giving them. And so, yeah, marijuana, we know, has been in the picture there. And particularly so obviously, children can't legally buy it in the states where they've legalized it, but they're getting access through their friends, through their older friends. And so, yeah, we haven't heard anything. We haven't seen research directly touching on what you're talking about, but not surprising that if you have youth who then need to go to an older friend who can, provide this, obviously it's probably a higher risk factor that person would use that position of power over them in a way that would not be good. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised to hear those stories.
Thank you for sharing that. I actually was speaking to a survivor not long ago, and she said, "Oh, I wasn't trafficked, but when my mom couldn't pay for her drugs, she gave them me." So I know it happened. I mean, we all know it happens. We
That's
just need to call it what it is. So thank you for
Horrible.
sharing this, because I've learned a lot just in a small amount of time.
Of course. And thank you for sharing that, because I think that's powerful. And I hope that you can, find time to share that more frequently, because, there's a lot of people out there that think you're using drugs. It's your own decision. You're perfectly logical. You're a rational
Right.
person. You're pleasing yourself. And then that's all that there is. And what you just demonstrated is the fact that drugs hijack the brain and lead you to do things that are destructive to yourself, to your family, and to your community. But in your head, it makes total sense that you're doing it because you need to receive that next reward. And that's why
Right.
that mom did that, is because her brain had been hijacked. And so I think for people need to know that, because
I agree. I
yeah, when you
agree.
make that choice, it screws up the way you make decisions.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I got a lot out of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
I did see another question that you did touch on, Luke, in your when you were presenting. It says, are any states wanting to take back the legalization?
Yeah, we're getting a lot of outreach on that. And so we have a lot of people asking for this, donors asking for this. And so, I can't really say much more, but I can just say stay tuned, because there will certainly, I think, be some efforts that'll be coming up very soon.
And do you have any templates for policy writing?
Yeah, like it would, I mean, obviously there's a lot of different policies out there. So we have some suggested language around, potency caps and some other language that's available on our website. But we also do try to help out where we can. We're a small team, but if you want to email us for advice or input or, best practice policy text for something you're trying to pass or defeat, let us know, and we'll definitely do our best to help you out.
Yeah, there's a lot that can be done even if your state has already legalized marijuana. So yeah, please contact us. We're happy to help.
If you need any help with that, Dr. Jill, I'll make sure to get you connected to them. Any other questions? I am going to remind you, I was able to put the PowerPoint in the chat, so please look through the chat and grab that. I'm not going to email it out since we have it here in the chat. I can throw it in there one more time again, so it's down here towards the bottom, so you can grab that there. Seeing anything else pop into the chat right now? But Kevin and Luke, thank you so much. We do really appreciate this so much. We appreciate you wearing red on DEC Awareness Day 2 for us and being here to kind of celebrate and recognize this call, or recognize this day with this call, talking about all the different issues that are impacting children and families and communities. And we need to be educated on that as professionals so we can do a better job as we turn around and help serve the children and families that you're working with on a day-to-day basis. So thank you all so much for being here. And thanks again, Kevin and Luke. We appreciate you guys so much.
Thanks so much for having us. Appreciate
Great to
it.
see you, Dr. Harding, as well. Good to see you again.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Dr.
Thank
Harding.
you all.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Carrie. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.